And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark, a very special interview coming to us from Rome, our EWTN Rome office. His Eminence, George Cardinal Pell, author of the Prison Journal, Volume 1, The Cardinal Makes His Appeal, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Welcome, Your Eminence, to EWTN's Bookmark. It's an honor to have you.
I'm very pleased to be with you, Doug. Very pleased.
Now, let me ask you, the subtitle of this is The Cardinal Makes His Appeal. What is your appeal?
I was tried by two juries. The first jury could not agree after 5 days discussion. After about 4 or 5 days discussion, the second jury found me guilty, so I appealed to what is called the Supreme Court in the state of Victoria. So that is, that's my appeal.
Okay. Now, the next two volumes coming out, 2 and 3, will the subtitle be different and relate to a different part of your experience?
It will, because it's chronological. I wrote 3 pages every day during my 13 months in jail. So the next 2 volumes will detail the second, third, and then the final period.
Okay. Now, in the introduction, George Weigel mentions that this prison journal should never have been written. Do you agree?
Yes, I do, because I was certainly innocent of the crimes, and there was no supporting evidence beyond the accusation. When I was interviewed by the police, everything that I said was validated by the final decision of the High Court. My accuser, he changed his story 24 times and eventually built for himself a perfect alibi, whereby it was quite impossible for him to be simultaneously in a procession, coming to the sacristy, and at the same time being raped and attacked in the sacristy.
Right. Now, also in the beginning...
Yes, the case should not have come to court.
Okay. So George Weigel also says, throughout his ordeal, Cardinal Pell was a model of patience and indeed a model of priestly character, as this journal attests. Knowing that he was innocent, he was a free man even when incarcerated. Is that how you viewed yourself while it was happening?
To some extent, yes. I wouldn't use George's superlatives, and to the extent that I managed to get through, it took quite a bit of struggle and prayer and self-control. But I was free to this extent because my conscience was clear, and I knew that God would clear me on these issues at least. So, and that does give you a basic freedom.
Right. Now, in the very beginning, you start off Wednesday, February 27th. Who are the McFarlands?
Oh, they're just very good friends of mine. I stayed with them in their house during the court cases in Melbourne. So they were very, very kind to me, and I'm close friends with them and their children and grandchildren.
Now, in the beginning, it says a good deal of the sentence discussion was surreal and Kafkaesque. How so? Well,
that was when I was being sentenced, and the judge had somehow to make sense of the fantastic implausibility of the accusations, that an archbishop fully robed, after a crowded Sunday Mass, 50 choristers, 12 servers, a brief window of opportunity, seized that time to violate 2 youngsters he didn't know. Now, the way, and it's fantastically implausible, so he claimed that I must have been, well, actually, he should have said that he'd have to be off my head. I was mad, but he also claimed that I must have been fantastically arrogant. Now, so he had to find some theory to justify this totally bizarre and actually impossible behavior.
Now, when you were put into a solitary cell, you got a small electric kettle and a TV. Which was more important to you?
Oh, the TV. Because there are quite a few good programs of history on this and that. I like sport. There was Australian football. There was the Tour de France, so we went around the French countryside. There was some rugby union. There was some cricket. So I got a lot of consolation from the sport. And also on Sunday morning there was a whole variety of religious shows, a couple of them from the United States, Protestant evangelists,
right,
which I watched every Sunday morning. Joel Osteen from Texas and Joseph Prince from California. So I got spiritual sustenance from them. I critiqued them each week, and then there were hymns of praise from England, which is a beautiful program.
Now, speaking of England, I know you studied there and you were a fan at that time of Manchester United, but you mentioned in the book that you really don't like Australian soccer. Why?
Well, I don't want to sound patronizing, because it's not at a sufficiently good level. It's a difference between chalk and cheese. I mean, the English soccer is amongst the best leagues in the world, and the Aussie soccer is grades and grades and grades below that. I wish them well. I'm also more of an Aussie rules fan than I am a soccer fan or even a rugby union fan. So there might be a little bit of a dimension of that, but it's, I mean, good soccer is magnificent spectacle.
Right. Are you still an anti-Collingwood fan?
Not seriously, but yes, I used to tell the kids going around that asked me in Melbourne what team I barracked for. I told them I barracked for two, for my own team of Richmond, who were premiers last year, and I said for any team that's playing against Collingwood, and that would regularly produce pandemonium and many, many objections, of course, from the many Collingwood supporters.
Right. One of the things you mentioned that you missed was having a watch. Why?
Well, that was early on. I was able to buy a prison watch. I was just, it's one of those things I was used to checking the time. And often for many years, I had a succession of duties. I had to be there on time. I didn't like to be late. And old habits die hard. So I like having a watch.
Now, you also talk about, in the beginning here, right at the beginning, returning your Jerusalem Bible. Now, I only picked up on that because that was Mother Angelica's favorite Bible. Was that a favorite of yours, or it just happened to be the one you had?
Probably it's the one I used most. It happened to be the one I had or was given, and for some reason they insisted that I use a prison Bible. Which I was happy to do. I didn't think the translation was as good and idiomatic, but the Word of God was there.
Right. You also, in the beginning, when you got some books, you ended up with a book by Peter Brown, Through the Eye of the Needle, on money in the ancient church. Why that book? Well,
you see, I'd been working with money in the Vatican, and I became aware that Mother Teresa had said that there were two particular challenges for priests, sex and money, and she thought that money was the bigger challenge. And after some time in the Vatican, I was inclined to agree with her. But I was just interested to see how at different periods of church history, how the church financed its operations, and just who were the generous people. And what they gave their money for.
Now, you also talk about in the book the idea of the intense kind of anti-Catholicism. You have a story, I think it's about your nephew, and who's a contractor, and just him trying to deal with the intense anti-Catholic atmosphere. Where did that come from?
It's a tiny bit like the United States. There's a tradition of anti-Catholicism. It was originally in Australia tied up with the English versus Irish, Catholic versus Protestant. But I think a number of the people we called WASPs in Australia, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, have become WASSers. That's white Anglo-Saxon secularists. And of course the scandals of pedophilia and the poor way that it was sometimes dealt with by the hierarchy have inflamed public opinion against the church.
And you specifically, there's a story in here where you denied someone wearing, I think, a rainbow sash, communion, and that apparently made you a bit of a target.
Yes, it did. Actually, probably the first time that happened was when Cardinal O'Connor came for the centenary celebrations of St Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne. And so then there were a succession of attempts by people wearing rainbow sash to receive communion as a sign that the church was abandoning its teaching on proper sexual activity. Now, if the person had come without the rainbow sash, we wouldn't know they would have received communion like everybody else.
Right. Now, in the beginning here, you talk about the different people. Though you're in isolation, you can hear at times people yelling or chanting, some Muslims chanting, and you say fidelity to Christ and his teaching remains indispensable for any fruitful Catholicism, any religious revival. That is why the approved Argentinian and Maltese interpretations of Amoris Laetitia are so dangerous. Why? And why did you make that point?
Well, I think that the scripture teaching of Jesus against divorce and remarriage is very explicit. I don't think we've got any warrant to go outside that, much less against it. And I think too the teachings of St Paul about the necessary preconditions for the reception of the Eucharist are quite clear. Now, in the moral activity, there are all sorts of levels of ambiguity and misunderstanding, but as far as I'm concerned, we don't contradict or depart New Testament teaching, especially the teaching of Christ and also the teaching of St. Paul.
You quote Job here, if we take happiness from God's hand, we must not take sorrow too, question. And you say, I didn't like writers, even great Christian writers such as St. John of the Cross, who emphasized the essential and necessary role of suffering if we want to come closer to God. I never read much of their work. So how did it impact you when you found yourself in that situation?
Well, I suppose I had to grow up. I had to come to terms with it. I'm still certainly not one of those people who would be rushing to martyrdom or race around looking for trouble. And undoubtedly, if we take Christ's teaching seriously about redemption through the cross, we have to associate our own suffering with his suffering.
Right. Now, you write about I'm caught in the struggle between good and the spirit of evil, and you also mentioned that you actually got, this is early on, 100 letters since I've arrived at the Melbourne Assessment Prison, most of them in the last 3 days. About a dozen of them are from fellow prisoners. What did the fellow prisoners write you about?
Oh, all sorts of things, literally. Sometimes about their own situation, which a lot of them wanted to give me good advice, urging me not to be too trusting. Some of them asking for help here or there. They wrote about, I suppose, everything under the sun. A number of them felt that they'd had dreams or premonitions. And not one of the prisoners wrote to me saying he thought I was guilty.
Right.
And matter of fact, one fellow, or a couple of fellows, said some of the hardcore criminals that had a bit of a meeting and discussed it together, and one writer said, wasn't it interesting, the criminals could recognise that you were innocent, and the judges couldn't.
Right,
and I was inclined to agree.
Now, did you get a letter from the Bourke Street murderer, and who is he?
Yes, I did. I got quite a number of letters. This fellow ran around in a car, tragically, madly, and killed 5 or 6 or 7 people and injured 30 others. Yes, he wrote to me regularly, but he's quite off the air, poor man.
Right. You also have here Mary Clarney Meany, just before going on a trip, wrote to you. You may be, and she said, you may be surprised to hear this, but your situation has changed the Catholic landscape within Australia, and she's saying for the better. And then you comment, I had remarked jokingly to 1 or 2 close little friends that I could not detect any improvement in myself despite the deluge of prayers and penance over the last few years from around Australia, the UK, US, and Ireland. What do you think of that comment now?
Oh, yes, I would agree. Once or twice I prayed to the good God. I said, I've received so many prayers, they might be superfluous for my purposes, so I asked the good God to redistribute them around in a more equitable sort of a way. God works through all sorts of people, very ordinary people sometimes.
Now, you did a lot of reading as well. I know early on you read Tolstoy's War and Peace. How long did it take you to get through it?
Well, I used to read 20 or 30 pages every night before I went to sleep, so it took me some months. I had other things I was reading during the day, but I'd read it when I was about 18 or 19, and when I finished reading it then, it was almost as though I'd lost a friend. So it's a great novel, and I enjoyed it once again. Sometimes I read books a second time, and I don't really enjoy them nearly as much as I did first time around. But I did, with War and Peace, it was different. It's a great, great novel, perhaps the greatest.
Right. You mentioned about seeing a program on Princess Diana, and you say she was stunningly beautiful. I still marvel at the depth and extent of the love and devotion for her. Why'd you decide to mention that?
Oh, well, because I'd watched the program. I was interested in her. I'd had some interesting... I was in Indonesia visiting a seminary. And it was the first year. It was in Sulawesi up in the north, and there was a centre for the first years. They each had houses. One was St. Therese, one was Francis Xavier, and one was dedicated to Princess Diana in Indonesia, of all things, all places. And so I said to the man running it, well, come, how on earth is that there's the Princess Diana is commemorated here? And he said, oh, that's to remind the seminarians not to go on the wrong path.
Oh. Now, do you still do still do Sudoku book puzzles, or was that just while you were in prison?
I do. I still, to try to keep to slow my mental decline, and so I'm maintaining my limited capacity.
Right. You mentioned here, like a number of insightful and devout Catholics, St. Therese feels that many graces are coming to the Church in this time of suffering. But her final sentence is blunt. I'll be praying hard for you to forgive those who have sinned against you so that you may show the world what Jesus looks like. And you say, she is right and I do forgive.
Yes. I've quoted her in a number of interviews, and also with Father Mitch. That she's a straight shooter and she was on the money.
Now, you brought up here, and it was interesting, a few letters you were talking about quoted Cardinal Francis George, the late and great Archbishop of Chicago, who predicted 3 generations of worsening trouble for bishops before a restoration. In defending his dire prediction to me, he noted that most commentators ignored his 4th stage rebound, the return to better times aided by Christian teaching. Is that how you think of it?
Yes. I was a good friend and a great admirer of Cardinal George. I think he was a great bishop, a very good, clear thinker. He understood the world around him. I hope he's being too pessimistic. 1 or 2 writers wrote to me and said I had anticipated I'd run ahead of his prognostications. I hope he's a bit pessimistic, but time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say that one of your great heroes was Churchill. How did that help you?
I don't know whether he helped me particularly in jail. I loved his use and mastery of the language. He was wrong on many things, but he was right on the threat of Hitler. I wouldn't say he was a spiritual inspiration for me, but he didn't quit. And he's a great hero for all the, especially the English-speaking peoples. I think there's always a bust of Churchill in the White House, I believe. So he was quite a man,
Right, you mentioned a couple others, including...
Not a religious man.
Right. You also mentioned Montgomery's statement at, basically, I guess, before El Alamein in North Africa, about standing strong and standing into... Is that what the church needs to do?
Yes, absolutely. And I used to often tell the story to bemused Catholic university students, but they got the point. I mean, we're going to go nowhere if we keep abandoning Catholic teachings. And we need a little bit of confidence. We need to stand our ground, present our case, and trust in the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say, once again, I remember St. Ignatius of Loyola's advice that we should act as though everything depends on us and pray as though everything depends on God. I accept this and believe in self-help under God because God has no hands but ours. But it is not difficult to become absorbed in the activity and let the prayer slip. Do you see that happening many times in the works of the church?
Yes, I think that's a very real danger. It was a real danger. Is a real danger for myself, less than it was because I'm not so busy. But we live in an agnostic age, and I think it was Blessed Eugene de Mazenod, the founder of the Oblates, who said it's not too difficult for a priest to live like a practical agnostic. Mm-hmm. For the invisible, transcendent, supernatural God and his love to slip down the rankings a bit.
Right. You also mentioned, as we're getting near the end, that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI published an 11-page reflection on the sex abuse crisis. You note, I was initially surprised that Benedict began by writing of the Creator God of love who communicated his message through Abraham and then Jesus. For him, a world without God is a world without meaning. When God dies in a society, this is the end of freedom. Certainly in present-day Australia, religious freedom is threatened and constricted.
Yeah, I think that is that's a challenge, strangely, more in the English-speaking world than in some other parts of Europe, mm-hmm. Western and Eastern Europe. The elements of the cancel culture, mm-hmm. The rejection of free speech, not allowing speakers on the controversial topics to speak in universities. It's a little bit ironic, but the church will I think, emerge as one of the great champions of free speech and one of the great champions of truth. Because, of course, if there's no truth, there's no point in arguing and discussing and dialoguing. If it's just my truth and your truth, often people will resort to power and to silencing those who disagree with them. Whereas if there's a truth towards which we can all work civilly and appropriately, that's what's made our democracies workable and the least bad form of government that's available.
Right. Let me ask you, just before we go, in writing this book, at what point did you think it might get published?
I wasn't sure that they would want to publish all of it. I was aware from early on that there was a real chance it would be published, but I wouldn't have been completely heartbroken if it wasn't. I didn't write it just for it to be published.
Right.
I wrote it with the hope that it would help people who are battling, and I wrote it also as a self-discipline, a focus, and a way of my own processing my faith and my feelings and my situation.
Right. Well, we appreciate it and you allowing it to be published for its insights for all of us. His Eminence George Cardinal Pell, Prison Journal, Volume 1. The Cardinal makes his appeal. We'll look forward to Volume 2 and 3, published by Ignatius Press, available through our EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you so much, Your Eminence, for joining us.
Doug, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to all our audience on Bookmark, make sure you check us out on the web as well at EWTN.com on demand. We'll see you next time.